Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Deja Vu. I have been in this place before. Because technically I have. I've seen this movie once before, a while ago. And for a lot of you people who have ever gone and seen the Tom Cruise movie, like Minority Report, this will feel fairly similar to that in some ways. Because in this movie, we try to go on and have pre-footage of a crime before it happens, but the crime has already happened. They're just looking on how to catch the guy who did the crime. But then by the end of the movie, it does kind of come off as this time traveling adventure. And so, like, there's the best of the both worlds where they find out who the killer is, but then go back in time to try and stop him. And I really like Denzel Washington kind of investigation movies. There's some interesting ones out there, like Bone Collector is pretty good. I like that one. And Virtuosity, like the Russell Crowe Denzel Washington movie, like I thought that was kind of interesting. So, and some people can go on and throw other Denzel Washington movies out there. I know there's one where I think like Denzel, I don't remember what this movie is called, but there's some other Denzel Washington movie where I think he ends up getting like accused of the crime and then he has to turn around and like clear his name throughout that film. I don't remember what it was called, but anyways, so, but I really liked Deja Vu. It's has some interesting ideas, but maybe not the best way to go about executing them all. There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a very busy film. Also, when they have to finally go on and explain to Doug what they are really seeing through these clips here, they really are not explaining it at any point to help this guy rationally understand this, as they're throwing out terms like Einstein-Rosen bridges and like, hey, things are just funneling into itself, and that's how we can get these images. And I'm just like, so what now? Like, somehow they've collected all of these phone or images collectively and like gather all this data and information up to somehow be able to look into the past. And so that's kind of what we get here. Whereas like Minority Report, they get to know what's happening ahead of time through these psychics, and then they turn around and have a division called pre-crime to stop somebody going on and doing a crime before it happens. And come to find out, they start to realize it's like, well, nobody really ever could have went on and did these crimes, so how can you justify arresting them for a crime they never committed? And then it's like, oh no. So with that said, let's go on into much more kind of teeing this movie up. Where can you also go on and find Deja Vu? For this one, I did not go on and look through like a Google search to see if it's like conveniently on somewhere. I'm assuming it's another one of those movies where you have to like rent it for like $3.99 or something like that. I don't think it's conveniently on some app somewhere. But I'm also going to help you find a app that you can dare in fact watch this movie for absolutely free, as long as it's hopefully conveniently still on the Google Play Store. I went on to an app called Vidlesy, 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 and I was able to watch this movie. And if you go on and you watch others, at some point it'll ask you to like share the app. You can kind of like go in and seem like you're going to share the app, back out, and then go on to watch the rest of the film. But yeah, so Deja Vu. What is this movie about? So we have a ferry, a a giant boat of sorts that is to have a bomb inside of it. And there seems to be a bunch of Navy sailors making their way probably off of Liberty, which basically means time off the boat. So all these sailors go onto this ferry, and the boat explodes, killing a bunch of naval officers. So we have Doug Claren, who is played by Denzel Washington here, who is to be this ATF agent, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent, bizarrely, that is to investigate this bomb and is to meet this FBI agent called Agent Preswara. Val Kilmer's character. I know I was going to kind of butcher that name anyways. But yeah, more than likely, I'm probably just going to say Val Kilmer whenever that character kind of comes up, because Preswara. I don't even know if I'm even saying that right. So, coming to find out, Doug is to know that this is to not be some accident, it's supposed to be some crime, because he is to find all of these pieces and these parts that are to conclude this evidence. And so, the further that Doug is starting to ask all these questions, to then realize that there is a number of things that he is making connections with, and realizing that, okay, this seems very unusual, we then have these FBI agents pulling Doug in, because Doug is to be much more observant than the common agent. And so they want to go on and bring him in to be involved in this case where they're looking through 4 days back of footage to try to think if they can come up with some kind of suspect, to see if they can go on and possibly solve this case via old footage. And instead, Doug is to get suspicious about a woman named Claire, who had been supposedly involved in this ferry explosion. But when Doug is to be more observant about this woman, he then realizes there's something up about this. Like, this woman was to have been killed before the ferry had even exploded. So Doug wants to go on and investigate Claire, which leads us to possibly figuring out who this murderer is, and then having Doug trying to track this guy down, so much so that he wants to track this man down before the crime even happens. And so that then leads Doug to do something that he should not, by going back into the future. So, the grading of this film, I have fun with this movie. Not everyone's gonna like Deja Vu, I will admit that. I would say that this is like a good movie. Thumbs up, I liked it. A lot of people will probably say that there's a better movie that exists out there. A lot of people will go on and say it's like, oh, Minority Report and Deja Vu isn't the exact same thing. Minority Report has so much more action than this does. Yeah, I get that. But I like the mystery of this movie. I like how they're going about solving things, and I like how they're trying to affect the past by trying to send things from the future to the past. There's some interesting things here. It's not perfect, but there's some interesting things. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just justifyingly enough go on into that double five time territory. Because it's about that time yet again to go on into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So, kind of how I was to tee this up, we have this ferry go on and have a number of these sailors make their way to this boat to then have a man in this ferry realize that this vehicle is to explode, and so goes the ferry within it. So, this ATF agent was to be the first agent in the scene, as he is to have watched on as his ferry was to explode, having Doug go on and meet with this lieutenant. Here's also the thing. The little girl who was to drop the doll into the water, that actually is Ellie Fanning, Dakota Fanning's sister. And so Ellie will at some point go on and make like a huge cluster of films, and this might have been like the start of all that. But I think it is kind of funny because when thinking of it, Denzel Washington went on to do this movie called Man of Fire, and I think Dakota Fanning was in that movie. And so it's kind of funny to see another Fanning in a Denzel Washington film. I think that's kind of funny. So, and there's another kind of interesting film, Man of Fire, that it's been a while since I've seen that one. So, Denzel is to do some investigating, and so we have him go under this bridge, and then we of course have Agent Priswara, who of course is Val Kilmer's character, who is to go on and ask if this detective is Lawrence Minuti, and Doug Carlin, who is Denzel Washington's character, is like, no, I'm not Lawrence. That's my partner. He's currently on vacation. And so the agent's like, well, we got to get everybody that we can on this. So call him off of vacation. So Doug's like, well, he won't answer his phone. And so he's like, well, okay. So come to find out, Doug is to need help with his agent because he wants to kind of feel around on this bridge. And so come to find out, he is to notice some ANFO, ANFO. And evidently this is to be ammonium nitrate waters solute, whatever that is. And so basically, if this was like a bomb, like this bridge would have the residue of that. And so immediately Doug's character is to realize that this is to be a crime scene, a crime investigation. It's not some accidental thing. So Doug then goes to the investigators that are also to be in this case after he goes and finds this dead body that has washed up, and come to find out Doug is to go onto this beach where this body was held, and supposedly, because the Sheriff Reed had told him about it and had said that this body had been picked up like an hour before the ferry even exploded. And Doug is like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. So Doug goes near that area and is to find out that there is to be this electrical blasting cap that is to have certain detonators and triggers and pieces that all connect together. And so Doug goes on to let the people that are working on this investigation know that this is a crime scene and where's the pot of coffee, because he needs some coffee. He's gonna go on and further go into this investigation. So Doug goes on to meet with this coroner who is looking through Claire's body, and it seems that there is a number of fingers that have been snipped off of this woman, and there seems to be some kind of liquid over this woman's body that may have been tied to the blast, may not have. So Doug starts to go on and touch this person's, like, by her lips, and needs a UV light. And come to find out, Doug realizes that Claire's mouth had been taped over. And so Doug is telling this coroner, hey, like, do a once over on this one's body as if the explosion never happened, and, like, tell me what you find. So we have Doug that is to make his way to the ATF office, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms office, and is to talk to an associate there called Agent Donnelly. And it seems that Agent Donnelly tells Doug that there had been a message left for him about a woman caller who is to ask for the description of Doug, and Donnelly had mentioned that he was tall, dark, and handsome, or maybe 2 out of the 3. And so Doug then goes on to call the person back who had left this message. And so Doug now goes to Claire's father to let him know that Claire is now dead, to see if really Doug can get some information from Claire's father about where she was going. Maybe she told him something. So Doug goes on to Claire's father, and Claire's father was coming into town, and I guess he might have gotten a flight, and he was flying back. He was consistently calling his daughter, hoping that she would pick him up, but he had to find alternative means because he might have thought that she slept in late or something. So Claire's father goes on to give Doug these keys, and so Doug then goes on to leave here, and Claire's father gives Doug these photos of Claire to say, like, hey, I want you to take these photos so that way you'll go on, you'll actually care about, like, the person that you're going after, that you're going to try to, like, care about this person, this victim. And so Doug goes on to Claire's place, and it's to put on gloves. I say that for a reason. So Doug starts to go through the place, is to notice on the refrigerator, a thing says you can save her, and there's a trash bag full of bloodied up, like kind of little gauze balls, and we have Doug, who is combing through this place and is to go through the answering machine and find that there is a girl, I believe, whose name is Clara, who is a friend of Claire, or no, wait. There's a friend of Clara's that goes on to the answering machine, and there's also her father that has a number of different messages. And then we find out that Doug is to be the last person on that that voicemail, that answering machine. And so Doug is to realize that this woman had called the ATF agent beforehand. Before everything happened, she had called. So Doug is like, okay, this is really weird. So Doug then goes on to meet with the FBI agents. And we also have Jack McCready, who is to like publicly make this kind of like press conference to mention that this event is to be as equally like tragic as Katrina, and that they're going to try to like do their best to kind of solve this whole case, so on and so forth, like going on and kind of getting ahead of this thing and letting everybody know what's going on, so on and so forth. So Jack seems to be the one who is to turn to Agent Priswara, who is again Val Kilmer's character, and is to kind of tell him what to do. So Doug makes his way to meet up with Priswara to give him an update on his findings. And so Doug ends up telling Priswara that the person that they should be looking into is Claire's character, because bizarrely Claire was to have called his office well before this bomb was to happen, and that seemed unusual. Before she was to die, she made this phone call, and Doug is to mention to them any number of things of what he had learned. He had also seen, Doug did, a video with Agent Donnelly where this guy was on this bridge and he was messing with something. And so it was too far to really see. It was too far to see what he was doing, but there was just a tape there. So Doug leaves, and immediately we have both McCready and both Priswara, who are immediately thinking like, yeah, this is the guy. Like, let's look into this guy. But Doug is to also mention that his partner's car is parked there, Minuti, and so Doug is like, hey, my partner's car is here? Like, did you speak to him? And they're like, no, like, any of those cars are from all the victims, and so, yeah, like, your partner is to be another victim from this ferry incident. And Doug is like, oh, okay. So we have Prisvara that meets up with Doug, and in one way or another, like he's just kind of like, come with me, like you're gonna be tied to what we're doing, because Doug, of course, is to be way more observant than a lot of other officers are. So there's something about him that just sticks out. So they go into what is to be this room that has these huge amount of like TV screens all over the place, and there's be a number of these scientific whiz kids, like Denny, Gunners, and Shanti, who are to be these three people who are to be these technicians that are to have been working on this whole experiment. And Denzel, when we come in, is seeing all these kind of strange vehicles and unusual tech, and so he's just like, okay, this is very strange. So Doug is to come into this room and see the fairy video from seemingly 4 days ago. And Doug is like, okay, like, how is it that you have this technology to be able to get all of this footage, plus also get the audio? And they go on and they explain, it's like, well, like, we've captured every single like phone conversation, we've captured every single thing of data from every cell phone, every camcorder, and every digital device on the world to reconnect all of these images back together. And so they try to explain it like that, but Doug is just kind of thinking like, I don't know if I can trust all of this just seems kind of very weird. And so somehow, with this weird goofy technology, they can also somehow be able to like see through walls and be able to kind of do whatever they need to kind of go on and do this whole investigation. So, like, as if like they would have like some satellite that just goes on and is to like look into the past. So immediately these guys are asking Doug, it's like, well, hey, who do you think that we should look into? Who could be a suspect? Where do you think we should go? And Doug is like, well, obviously look into Claire. Like, Claire is the only like unique individual compared to everyone else that we know about. So hopefully, if we look into Claire, we can find her killer. So they go on and they look into Claire's apartment, and so Claire is making phone calls and all kinds of things. So Claire is to have a man on the line called Alan. They end up getting his phone number. Come to find out, he won't be the guy. And so, come to find out, Claire is trying to sell her car. And because I guess they really need the money. So, Claire at some point is to go on and jump into the shower into the scene. And of course, the guys are like, hey, yeah, like, let's definitely like look at while this girl is showering. And we have them, like, we have the one Shanti in this situation that's just like, do we really need to like watch her shower? Like, is that going to help our case? And Doug is like, well, hey, how about we just kind of look around? We just comb through her place to just kind of see if we can get any kind of like any kind of information about this one, where she's going next. if she has a calendar that can help us. So at some point we continue to push on here. So Claire is to get paranoid that someone is in her place. She is to get out of her shower thinking that someone is there, and Doug and everybody on their side of things are possibly thinking that Claire may have a stalker. And Claire is to have this diary, and she writes into it that she feels like someone is watching over her. And Doug is like, yeah, someone is watching over her. We are. And somehow she realizes that, oddly enough. So the further and further they start looking through this footage and try and go on and do more of this investigation, finally we get to a point where Doug is to use this laser pointer to see if he can do something. So Doug uses this laser pointer, and bizarrely we have Claire who notices this laser pointer for a second in the past, and then bizarrely everything shuts down in this footage area because something had interfered with the field. And so finally Doug is to now figure out that they're actually looking through the past. And so Doug now needs to be explained, like, how exactly they're pulling this off. And they're throwing a bunch of words like Einstein, Rosenbridge, and all this stuff that doesn't make sense. And Denny is kind of folding this paper in half, trying to explain it. And so Doug is to say, like, I don't get what any of this means. And so Doug is to ask if Claire is dead. And so the guys are like, well, of course she's dead. And it's like, no. Like, Doug breaks this screen and is to say, okay, this screen now is dead. Is Claire just like this TV screen, or is there some way for us to say that she is not dead yet? And they're like, well, there's a way to prevent that. And Doug is like, good. Like, let's figure out how to prevent her death. So they go on and they figure this out, that they can go on and send a message into the past, and it's going to cost them a ton of money to be able to do so. So they send a message into the past, and they try to have it appear onto Doug's desk. So what happens is that the moment that Doug in the past is to supposedly read this note, he is arguing with Minuti about something, and Doug is telling Minuti to enjoy his vacation. And so Doug is telling them as quickly as possible to hurry up sending this note, or Doug's going to leave soon and not be able to read this note. And so by the time they fully fledgedly send this note, Doug leaves, and so Minuti ends up picking up the note. And so they're like, okay, well, at least this note is to be seen by someone. Because they go on and they look through certain clips of the past to try to go on and look at the bridge during a certain time period to see that someone had to have gone on and gone into the bridge, and so they didn't end up actually seeing who it was, but they went on to write a note saying someone will be at this bridge at this time and they will be the bomber. So Minuti goes on and investigates this because they don't have a facial recognition of this guy. They don't know who it actually is. So when finally they, of course, go on to now have Minuti go after this guy, and we forcibly have Doug, who is to have to go into this Humvee and get this headgear on and chase after the character that they realize is the villain of this story, because they of course go on to have looked in the past to see Minuti going on and trying to arrest this guy, and the guy who is the villain ends up shooting Minuti, dragging his body and putting him into his vehicle. Doug is to have to furiously or rapidly need to go on and chase after this guy in this Humvee vehicle with this headset. So Doug is following after this guy and is to have this headset on, but Doug starts getting into car accidents and smashing into all of these vehicles because he is much more paying attention to the screen where he is looking into the past than him presently getting into all of these wrecks and accidents and whatever, and Doug is calling for all these ambulances. So Doug is to even see the face of this man and is to tell them to get like facial recognition so they can figure out who this guy is. So from all of these accidents, come to find out, Doug loses connection to be able to see what's going on, but it seems somehow the FBI agents from their feed can still see things. So everybody is going on and telling him where to go. So Doug ends up into this area that I guess was to have been heavily damaged, and all of the agents are saying like, well, like, we don't see that in our feed, so it must just have happened recently. So these agents are telling Doug where to go, and the way that Doug is to continue on his path here, he then is to realize that there's to be this certain kind of aftermath mark on the ground, and Doug realizes that Minuti may soon be killed off here by who we find out is Carol Orstrad. Carol. So now we have both Doug and we have Shanti, who, of course, are very emotional because they realize that they had pushed this man to his death. They had killed this man. They had also, Doug had killed his own partner, sadly. And so they figure out who the killer is. And so now they have to further go on and see how this is going to still lead up to the connection with Claire in the past. and kind of the lead up to this whole ferry bombing, as they're also trying to track down Carroll and arrest him for a crime that he has done. And so come to find out, Claire is to go on her date. And after her date, it seems that she is to go on and get this phone call. And this phone call is to, of course, be Carol. And we had Doug, who is to figure out, it's like, that's the guy. That's the killer. I know it for sure. So Carol is to go on and ask Claire for him to go on and look at this car, but he wants to do it on a very specific day. And Doug is like, well, of course he does. Like, he wants to do it right before the crime is going to happen. And, like, he also wants to schedule this to where there's no conflict with Claire, so no one will miss her or know that she's, of course, missing, and call the police and get that all, like, to kind of pick the best time. So they figure all of that out. They go on and they realize, okay, this has to be the guy. So, and I know this might not be like perfectly with the film, but it's got to be freaking close enough, because there's a lot of things that go on in this movie also. So we further go into this film, and so they're going on and finding Carol, who is on this kind of like swamp, like, boat fan vehicle, and he's in this swamp kind of boating around, and they catch him, they arrest him, and so Doug is to do the interrogation on Carol, and is to have Carol mention to him that like he had gone on and gotten kicked out of the military, and so Carol was upset about that, so he wanted to like go after the US government, and that everything that he had done was his destiny, and that he's going to go on and do everything that he can to win, because that's all he sees in his future, blah, 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 blah. And Doug is like, well, like, I see a lot of KY jelly in your future, so get ready for that. Because you did this crime, and we know it. So Doug catches the man, and so it seems like they wrap this up in a nice, neat little bow, and they can't go on and try and save anything from the past. They can't go on and save all these people, because guys like Denny, one of the tech guys, are to have this theory. It's like, well, what if whatever you do is going to happen regardless? And so we also had this one investigating Agent Stahlhuth that was talking to Doug when Doug was to go on and see the first footage of Claire in her home. And Stahlhuth was talking to Doug, and so Doug was asking Stahlhuth if anyone in Claire's home was brushing her teeth, and Stahlhuth was like, no. Like, what are you talking about? And Stahlhuth was to actually tell Doug, it's like, yeah, like, you, like, for some goofy reason, are horrible at kind of doing investigating, because, like, your fingerprints are all over the place. And Doug is like, what does he mean by that? Like, I wore gloves. Come to find out, there is a whole reason for that. So they catch the guy, and now we have Doug and we have Agent Provora, and we still have Doug that just feels uneasy about what all had happened. That really still there was more that they could have done, and Doug is going to prove that. So Doug then goes and meets with Denny and says, like, you know what, like, I'm gonna go back, put me in the machine, and like I'll try and stop this crime. And Denny's like, well, what's to happen if you go back in time and past you is to see future you's body? How are you going to, like, how can we explain any of that? And Doug is just like, I don't know, like we just have to do this. Cause they were to go on and try to bring animals and put them into the past, and it didn't work out because every animal was to die. So Doug is to be sent back to the past to this hospital, and he is shaking like crazy. And they rip open his shirt, and it says "Revive Me" on it. So they start to defib Doug. Doug comes back to life, and so Doug has merely hours before the original ferry is to explode. So Doug goes on and finds this ambulance, drives off with it, to then have him. Oh, and Doug was to only wear a shirt and boxers because there can only be a certain limited amount of stuff that can go back with him. Kind of like in Terminator, where you can realize that there was like no metals that could go back because only living things could go back. So Doug goes back in time, gets his ambulance, and he knows exactly where Carol is going to be in the past. He's going to be in that area that was to be burnt down. So Doug drives back to that location to prevent Claire's death. So Claire is to go on and scratch Carol's face, hence why the fingers were chopped off. And Doug crashes his ambulance into this place where both Claire and Carol were in. And so, because Carol had went on and took Claire's vehicle and then took her along with it to kill her off here and then have her somehow be connected to this bombing. So Carol is to run out of this place, and it's continuing to explode, and Doug is also trying to make this place explode more with these kind of helium canisters that are nearby. So both Doug and Claire are to rush out of this building before it completely explodes. And so Doug is to try to unmask Claire, and Claire is to like think that Doug is to be her person that grabbed her, and Doug is to tell Claire, like, no, like, the one that you attacked, you scratched him in the face, right? Do I look like I have scratches in the face? She's like, well, no. So yeah, like, I'm not the guy. So Doug is shot in the shoulder, and so his plan is just to run to the ferry because they only have such a limited time. And Claire is telling Doug, it's like, well, hey, you're going to bleed out. How about we go to my place, and because it's nearby anyways, and we kind of just bandage you up. So they go to Claire's place via the suggestion of Doug. So Doug knows where Claire lives. Doug even knows what's all in Claire's place, and Claire gets heavily paranoid about all of that, as Doug is to tell Claire, hey, don't wear the dress you're wearing now, wear the blue and white one, because things will be different from like the time before. In his brain, that's what he's thinking. Because when Doug was to see her on that on that table dead, like she was wearing that same dress. So Claire is to now pull a gun on Doug and is to tell him, it's like, how do you know all this stuff about my place? And Doug is to finally tell Claire that, like, if I was to go on and tell you something but you would never believe it, like, what would you do? And Claire goes on and says, like, well, I would try to believe you. I think they end up saying a little bit more than that. It's like where he says, like, meant something like the fate of the world or something, some goofy thing like that, where it's like, what if I was to tell you, like, the fate of the world was at stake and you wouldn't believe, like, it's some goofy kind of term of phrase like that, and they end up recycling that phrase again, where Claire ends up saying that to Doug by the end of this film. So Doug then is to convince Claire or get her trust. So Doug gets bandaged up and they run off to get to the ferry because they want to make Carol think that he had succeeded, so that way he won't go on and try to prevent the bomb from happening, and so that they can also catch him later. And so the only X factor in that whole timeline from before will be that Claire was dead in the past. So Doug goes on to the ferry and is to try to hide himself from Carol. Carol is to go on and plant this bomb, and so they just need to know, like, okay, that's Claire's truck. So Doug is saying that, like, well, hey, I think I'm just gonna go on and just defuse this truck, or defuse the bomb in this truck, and it'll work out. So when both Doug and Claire finally get to this truck to try to go on and defuse this bomb, come to find out that there is an agent there who is trying to arrest them. And so there's only so much time left, and so Doug turns to Claire. It's like, well, there's only one thing left to do. And so they drive the, like, SUV off of the ferry to have it fall into the water. And so now Claire and Doug are trying to scramble out of this vehicle, but come to find out, Claire is to get out of the vehicle, and Doug somehow ends up getting stuck, and so the bomb explodes. Doug is dead, and Claire swims out to then be met by a bunch of police officers, and Claire is to kind of tell them, for the most part, what was to happen. So, come to find out after the explosion, where the ferry wasn't affected, but so younger Doug, days ago Doug, from the very beginning of this film, is to meet up with Claire, and we then have the exchange that we had Doug say to Claire. Claire now says to Doug, and they drive off together in this vehicle, and I'm assuming at some point Claire goes on and explains to Doug what had all happened that it seems that there was a Doug from the future who knew things about the past. So that, of course, is the way that this movie ends. There was also some funny things about like Denny and Doug having these like exchanges when he was going to go back in time. How like Doug was telling Denny, it's like, hey, like say hi to a younger me, and this and that, and like they were having these jokes about like I'm having an out of body experience and all these kind of things. So yeah, there's some funny things going on in this movie. I enjoyed it. There are some rough ideas here, I'll admit that, but I liked this film. You can go on and feel however you feel about it. You can dump on it. You can say it was great. But anyways, I'm just gonna decide to get out of here. I think that this movie is complicated enough that I probably realized there was a number of bajillion things that I didn't get 100% right. There was also Doug had went to Claire's funeral, and there was a moment where Claire's father was talking about the certain music that would be used. That Claire was to say, it's like, why did they play all the good music towards the end? So there is all that in the movie, but I didn't think that part would be necessarily important to the film, but I thought to just kind of slip that in there so I wouldn't forget about it. But yeah, other than that, I think everything else for the most point was to technically be covered. Uh, oh, uh, we also had Doug, who when he was to see Carol buy that vehicle, Doug is to go on and mention about all the stuff that Carol had said before about his destiny and this and that. And so instead of them going on and having Carol arrested, they just run him over with his vehicle. That's how they get rid of Carol. And then an agent kind of comes in and is like, hey, like stop whatever you're doing, and then they just drive the car over the ferry anyways. But yeah, so they they end up kind of smushing Carol, and so that's how they get away with him, or that's how they get rid of him. Carol mentions that she killed Carol, and Doug is to tell Carol, no, I killed him. You didn't do anything. I did. Because Doug did have it seem like he had no bullets in his gun, but he ends up tossing one bullet into the chamber. So yeah, like that's for the most part, that's how all of that stuff ends up kind of playing out for the most point. There's little details that I'm sure is all over this movie that I just kind of quickly rammed through or didn't go into heavier detail about. I just kind of went about it in a very roundabout way, but at least I remembered some portions of this film because I'm like, okay, where did all of this go? And I know there was some stuff where I said it out of order, but anyways, I'm just gonna get out of here. Thank you for listening and watching this, because I really do appreciate it. Deja vu. Hopefully at some point you've been in this place before, because I'm gonna get out of here and get out of this place. So hopefully I can go on and do another review. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.